Alright then, let's begin our current affairs lecture series, and the subject that we are going to cover in this particular lecture would be related to international relations. So all the important news items from the past 1 week with respect to the topic of international relations shall be covered in today's lecture. Now let me tell this to you in advance that, well, today's lecture is not that bulky. Okay, it is not going to be that bulky. Plus, it's very short. Not many news items were there which are important from the perspective of UPSC examination, but still we will cover them. Okay, so without further introduction, without further delay, let's straight away dive into the lecture. So let's begin. So current affairs IR July part 2, and here are the topics that we are going to cover. As you all know, that Prime Minister was on a 3-nation tour. First he went to Indonesia, then Australia, and the final leg was New Zealand. So India and New Zealand signed their strategic partnership roadmap until 2030, which basically outlines India-New Zealand's 4-year agenda, how they are going to take their relationship forward in the next 4 years. So we'll talk about this. Then, well, this news item was not that important, but still we'll discuss it, that European Union is thinking about adding 4 more countries. Currently it is a 27-nation bloc, but it is thinking about adding 4 more countries, and one country among those 4 nations is Ukraine, which can be a controversial issue and Russia might not like it. So we'll cover this. And in the end, we'll talk about geoeconomics. Launch of Bharat Tex 2026. Through this exhibition, India is trying to promote its textile sector and offering the world an alternative away from China. So we'll talk about this point as well. Okay, so these are the 3 news items that we shall zero in our attention on. So let's start discussing them one by one. Starting with topic number 1, and that is India-New Zealand strategic partnership. Now look, India and New Zealand have a lot of things in common. We align on most issues. Geopolitically, we align on most issues, but there are certain thorny issues as well. There are certain problems within this relationship because of which we are not growing that much. Now, both India and New Zealand, when Prime Minister Modi was there, they have basically decided upon a 4-year roadmap for their strategic partnership. Now, India and New Zealand are strategic partners. New Zealand is very important for India's objectives in the Indo-Pacific region. Hence, they have signed various agreements. Okay, 6 particular agreements were of importance. Okay, 6 agreements were of importance. So we'll talk about those 6 agreements. Why is New Zealand important for us? Okay, especially with respect to India's pivot to Indo-Pacific. And we'll also talk about the challenges in this relationship, why this relationship is still not reaching its potential. Okay, so let's begin. So India-New Zealand strategic partnership. So what was in the news? During first official visit by Indian Prime Minister to New Zealand in 40 years, now this is significant, both nations formally elevated their bilateral ties to strategic partnership. Now India and New Zealand are strategic partners. They adopted the India-New Zealand strategic partnership roadmap to 2030. So it is a 4-year agenda. Okay, how are they going to take this strategic partnership forward? This serves as a 4-year implementation framework built on 6 core pillars. We'll talk about these 6 pillars. Okay, structurally, the roadmap is non-binding. That means it's voluntary. It's not compelling, meaning it creates no immediate financial commitments or legally binding obligations, so both countries are comfortable and free. Now, here is New Zealand, as you can see, because international relations related news items are important from the perspective of location-based, map-based questions also. The countries that are in news in international relations, well, UPSC tends to ask questions related to their map work or locations. Okay. Now, as you can see, this is where New Zealand is, right to the east of Australia. New Zealand is divided into 2 islands, the upper island, northern island, and the southern island. Okay. Now, the location of New Zealand lies in Pacific Ocean. Hence, it is important for India's Indo-Pacific strategy. Okay. Now, what are the 6 core pillars of our roadmap to 2030 or 6 core pillars of our strategic partnership? Number 1, political and diplomatic. Well, both countries will make it a point that they have annual summits, so they meet regularly, not 40 years after a PM go. I mean, that was a very long delay. And diplomatically also, they would increase their communication. Okay. Then defense and maritime security. Since I've told you that the location of New Zealand is important from India's perspective or India's Indo-Pacific strategy and India's strategy to counter China as well. Hence, they have cooperated in this domain as well. Basically, they have signed Indian maritime domain awareness agreements. Okay. Then trade and economic. Well, currently the bilateral trade between the 2 sides is 7 billion New Zealand dollars. Okay. We want to double that. Then people, culture, sport, cricket. Okay, both countries share cricket diplomacy, cultural. There are so many ties. There is a huge Indian diaspora that is living in New Zealand, so they are going to promote all of that. Then they are going to cooperate in science, technology, disaster management, plus in multilateral international relations also. So, for example, the example of this is regional and multilateral. Well, New Zealand supports India's permanent membership to United Nations Security Council. India is seeking to become a permanent member, which will give India the veto power. So New Zealand supports that bid. Okay, so both countries are aligning as far as geopolitics of the world is concerned, geostrategy of the world is concerned. Both countries are on the same side. New Zealand also wants to counter Chinese expansionism, and India also wants to counter that. So they see eye to eye, okay, in this regard. But everything is not rosy, as they say. Okay, there might be some good photo ops when Prime Minister Modi went there, but still, I mean, there are some issues between the two sides. Okay, so what are those issues? Geopolitical frictions, the dairy conundrum. You should know this, that New Zealand's economy is dependent on the dairy sector. New Zealand is a dairy giant of the world. It exports a lot of milk products, beef products. Okay, now New Zealand wants access to Indian markets. Okay, which means that India should reduce import duties on New Zealand dairy products. But India is not doing that, because if India does that, then Indian dairy farmers would suffer. So this is the problem. India's cooperative-based dairy sector protects the livelihood of millions of small farmers. As a leading market-driven dairy exporter, New Zealand heavily prioritizes market access. So whenever there is going to be, or whenever there is an economic deal between the two, New Zealand asks for market access to India, and India blocks that because India says we want to protect our small farmers. So this is a big issue. Then the China calculus. India views the Indo-Pacific through a security lens to actively counterbalance China. But New Zealand does not look at China from that lens, okay? Or New Zealand doesn't consider China that much of an enemy, because China accounts for roughly 30% of New Zealand's exports. China is important for New Zealand. Hence, New Zealand cannot afford to antagonize China that much, because its livelihood depends on it. Okay, 30% of its export is dependent on China. Then transnational extremism. India remains highly sensitive to anti-India separatist activities taking place on New Zealand soil, especially the Khalistani activities. But while New Zealand says that we prioritize freedom of speech and expression, so these people from the Indian diaspora, if they are expressing something, even if it is separatist, Khalistani, well, we can't block it. So both sides don't see eye to eye in these areas as well. So these are the three thorny issues between the two sides. Now, what is the way forward? What should we do? Okay. To make the roadmap 2030 effective, both nations must employ a strategy of compartmentalized convergence. Okay, focus on niche synergies. Well, focus on areas where you can cooperate. Don't focus on these thorny issues. Focus on areas where you can cooperate. Like India can help New Zealand with green hydrogen. India has expertise in this. Digital public infrastructure. India has expertise in this. Okay, then operationalize the skies. Both sides do not have a direct flight. So if you want better people-to-people contact, well, you need direct flights from India to New Zealand to and fro. Okay. Then deepen Antarctic collaboration. New Zealand is close to Antarctica, and New Zealand has a lot of R&D interests in Antarctica. India also has various research stations in Antarctica. So both sides can cooperate as far as scientific research is concerned in Antarctica. These are some of the areas where these sides can cooperate. Okay. So even if these things are a problem, ignore them for a while and cooperate on your synergies. Cooperate on areas where you converge. Okay, that's about it. That's all you need to know as far as New Zealand is concerned. Now let's quickly shift our focus to next news item, and that is EU enlargement geopolitics. Okay, so basically we all know, I mean, we'll finish this topic very quickly. It's not that important, but I thought maybe one or two questions can be asked, especially with respect to map-based work. Okay, so that is why I've included this topic. So what was in the news? Well, EU conducted four conferences in one single day with four separate countries. These four separate countries want to become a member of European Union. Okay, so we will basically talk about these four countries. We will talk about the process, how difficult it is to become a European Union member, and how does it change things for India. If all these four countries become a member of European Union's members, well, this would change things for India. How? We'll talk about that. We'll take a look at this development from an India lens. Okay. So EU enlargement geopolitics. So what was in the news? On July 14th, under the rotating Irish presidency of the Council of EU, so European Union Council has rotating presidency. The European Union convened 4 intergovernmental accession conferences. Accession means you want to become a part of EU. So in one single day, you conducted 4 conferences with 4 different countries. That is why this day was also called Super Tuesday. Now, who are these 4 countries? Which 4 countries are we talking about who want to become a member of EU? Well, Ukraine, number 1, because it is currently facing threats from Russia. And becoming a member of EU will open the doors for Ukraine becoming a member of NATO also. Okay, plus it would come under the security umbrella of European Union. So if tomorrow Russia threatens it further, well, European nations would be forced to come to its rescue. Then Moldova, Montenegro and Albania. These are the Balkan countries. Okay, so as you can see on this map, well, all the colored countries are currently part of EU. Okay, the white countries aren't. So here is Ukraine. Then over here, Albania, Montenegro, Moldova are there. Okay, this is the Balkan Peninsula. Okay, so take a look at this map. It is also shared in your notes. Now, what are the structural mechanics of admission to EU? So it is very difficult to become a part of European Union, because if you have to become a part of European Union, you have to follow European law or EU's law. You have to change your country's legal system policies to align with EU law. Now, what is EU law? EU has divided all its compulsory legal principles into 35 chapters. If a country wants to become a member of EU, they have to follow all these 35 chapters. Basically, inculcate these 35 chapters in their domestic laws and policies. Okay, these 35 chapters have been divided into 6 parts. Okay, for example, fundamentals, internal market reforms, green agenda, external relations. Plus, they have to fulfill each and every part. So part 1 is finished, then part 2 is finished, then part 3 is finished, part 4 is finished, and so on and so forth. Okay, plus once you enact certain laws aligning with European Union, then all the other European Union members, they vote on it, whether they agree with Ukraine or Moldova's policy changes, okay, whether they agree that they are aligning with EU law. And even if one country says no, well, the candidature is cancelled. So it is very difficult, unanimity rule. Okay, this is not that important for you. What is important for you is this. Why is EU looking for expansion? Okay, earlier France used to block any expansion bids. Whenever any country would put forward a proposal that we want to join EU, France would block it, because France said that we shouldn't focus on expansion, we should focus on internal cohesion. First, let's sort our own house in order. Okay, then we'll think about expansion. But with Russia's attack on Ukraine and Europe, other European countries feeling vulnerable, now European Union is thinking about expansion. They have changed their tactic, and now they think that they need to expand, or else big countries can bully them. Okay, more countries would mean more budget, more defense spending, all these things. Okay, now all of this is not that important. What is important is this, the India angle. Okay, how does it change things for India? Let's read it out. Shifting trade standards. As the EU bloc expands into Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans, Indian exporters will have to adapt to new unified regulatory landscape. You see, whenever India exports something to European Union, it has to follow, the products have to follow the European Union code. Up till now, when India used to export certain items to Ukraine, Moldova, well, because they were not part of European Union, we could get away with not following European code. But now if they become part of European Union, we have to follow this code. So this changes our exports to these 4 countries. Okay. Then rerouting supply chains. Strategic EU alignment in candidate countries drives massive infrastructure investments. Now, when these countries would become a part of EU, EU would have to build transportation infrastructure, roads, bridges, so as to bring more connectivity. Okay. The expansion of trans-European transport network into Eastern Europe creates fresh entry corridors for India via alternative Mediterranean and Black Sea hubs. Now, it opens trade routes into the European markets for India. Now, India can enter Europe through Ukraine, through Moldova. Okay. Calibrating multi-alignment. An expanding EU bloc with tightly integrated foreign and defense policies will likely exert collective diplomatic pressure. That's why EU is expanding. They want to increase their weight. With more countries becoming part of EU, their diplomatic weight would increase, and they can bully India. For example, they can ask India not to buy Russian oil. Okay, and they can bully India in a little because they will have more diplomatic stature. Okay, currently India chooses to ignore EU, but that can change if more and more countries become a part of EU, right? So this is there. This is the India angle. You should focus on India angle as well as this map. That's about it. If you remember these two things only from this news item, that would be sufficient. All right. And now let's move on to last news item of the day, and that is launch of Bharat Tex 2026. So Bharat Tex is basically India's exhibition to the world, because we want to pitch ourselves as the textile giant of the world. If you want to buy anything related to any textiles, well, you should buy it from India. Okay. And plus, we are posing ourselves as an alternative to China. Currently, Western countries are scared of their over-reliance on China and they want to diversify. Okay. Now, India can be an alternative for these Western countries, especially in the textile sector where we have a lot of expertise. So basically, this exhibition called Bharat Tex would showcase India's textile prowess, and many delegates from different countries would come and they would place orders. Countries would basically come and they would sign MOUs with India, like 10-year supply agreement of raw cotton, 10-year supply agreement of yarn, like this. So this is a good thing for India's textile sector. Plus, textile sector is important for us because it gives employment to so many people. Plus, it has a dominant chunk in our exports basket as well. Okay, so this would generate export revenue. Plus, it would also give more livelihood opportunities, jobs to many people involved in the sector. Okay, so let's talk about this Bharat Tex. Okay, launch of Bharat Tex 2026. So third edition of Bharat Tex commenced on July 14th at Bharat Mandapam at New Delhi, organized by Bharat Tex Trade Federation along with Ministry of Textiles. It has solidified India's position as world's largest integrated textile value chain exposition. Okay, now why is this important? Because the entire world is looking for supply chain reshoring, rerouting. Okay. Contemporary geopolitical landscape is shifting away from hyper-globalization towards friend-shoring. You know what friend-shoring means? That you get your goods from your friends. Okay? Because most of these Western countries are getting most of their goods, imports from China. But they don't see eye to eye with China politically. And if tomorrow China decides to stop those supplies, well, China can blackmail them into political decisions. Right? They realize that. Therefore, they want to diversify. And now the ideas of friend-shoring are becoming popular, which means that, well, you route your supplies from friendly shores. Okay, friend-shoring, de-risking. And that means going away from China. And India can be an alternative. Now, India is posing itself to be an alternative to China for your supplies of goods and services. And in one sector where India can be a very good alternative to China is textile sector, because we are giants when it comes to textile sector, and that is not today. It has been there since thousands and thousands of years. Okay, since Indus Valley civilization. So Bharat Tex explicitly capitalizes on this China plus one strategy. Okay, alternative to China. India is one of the few global economies that maintains an end-to-end integrated textile pipeline. The entire value chain of textile sector is highly developed in India. So as far as textile sector is concerned, India has a lot of advantages, and the world can basically rely on India as a good textile supplier. By hosting this platform, India seeks to execute major bilateral institutional pacts like 10-year supply agreements. Okay, so this is there. Now, Prime Minister Modi once said that if you really want to further develop our textile sector, focus on these 5F. So it is PM Modi's 5F vision. Okay, so what is this 5F vision? Farm, from where you will get your raw cotton, natural silk. Then fiber, yarn, you spin that raw cotton into threads, yarn spinners, synthetic fibers. Then factory, MSME hubs. Then PM Mitra parks for textile. We have created textile parks. Then fashion. Now, after you have created textiles, now you have to create fashionable garments that have huge demand. Okay, and then foreign. Global sourcing contracts, free trade agreements, this, so that we have a good market for our products. So these are the 5 F's. Remember them, use them in your mains answers. Okay. Now, the major pillars of this third edition of Bharat Tex. Okay. Third edition, which was recently conducted in Bharat Mandapam. Well, we said that our textile sector would focus on sustainability. Okay. we said that now our textile sector would focus on sustainability. Europeans really love this word, okay, that if they are wearing sustainably built fibers, they feel good about it, okay. Then there is circular economy. We would recycle, reuse the waste generated. And industry 5.0, we will use high-tech machines for improving the efficiency of our factories, okay. So these are the major pillars. This is what we were trying to highlight, okay, that our textiles are sustainable, we don't generate a lot of waste, and we use high-tech products, especially technical textiles. You know what technical textiles are? Technical textiles are those textiles which are used for specialized operations like fireproof suits, astronaut suits, okay. These require a different textiles. So these are technical textiles used only for specific things. Now, there are certain challenges in front of textile sector, okay. Man-made fiber mismatch. Global apparel demand is heavily dominated by synthetics and polyester blends. India's domestic output remains historically skewed towards cotton. The world is shifting towards this polyester and all, but we are mostly cotton exporters. So we have to bridge this gap. Then bilateral tariff disadvantage. There are many friendly countries who basically apply very high tariffs on us. Despite rising friendshoring, Indian apparel exports face high import tariffs in EU, UK and even USA. Plus, they give very low tariffs to Bangladesh, Cambodia and Vietnam. And that is why Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, because they get zero duty access, they outcompete our textile sector. So this is a big challenge. We need to solve this diplomatically. This can only be solved through diplomatic channels. Okay, and MSME fragmentation. Most of our textile exports come from MSME sector, but MSME sector is highly fragmented. Therefore, you do not get the advantage of economy of scale. Over 80% of India's textile base comprises unorganized MSMEs. Now, these are really inefficient. This fragmentation complicates the rapid implementation of uniform ESG traceability. Plus, when you are saying that your textiles are sustainable, well, these unorganized MSMEs are not sustainable, okay, because they have to cut costs. They are small players. Plus, they escape government scrutiny also. Government cannot keep a track on them. So if 80% of your textiles are being manufactured in the informal sector, how can government say that, well, this is sustainable? Because it is difficult to keep a track of informal sector. So this is a huge challenge. Okay, these are the three challenges. That's about it, right? And with that, we conclude today's session. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I'm sure it has added value to your preparation, but it will add more value if you're consistent and regular with this lecture series. Plus, you revise this lecture from the notes provided by us. These notes are shared on our Telegram channel, and the link to our Telegram channel is provided in the comment section below. So do check it out. On that note, I shall take your leave with the promise of seeing you again with another set of news items. Thank you, everyone.